Good morning. Glad to have each and every one of you here this morning. Glad to have each and every one of you here today, either here in person or here by live stream. Be a little bit interesting this morning. We're lacking a little bit of our personnel, so bear with us if you're home watching. We don't have anybody really monitoring the camera right now, but we're going to be reading from John again this morning. The lessons continuing on Jesus' teachings and Jesus' journey throughout Jerusalem and the temple. I'm going to first begin by letting Andrew read the Bible Meets Life this morning.
When I moved to Texas in 2005, I needed a new driver's license. When I went to the Texas Department of Public Safety, the woman assisting me administered an eye test. All I had to do was read the letters on the screen. No problem. I aced the first screen and the second screen. But the third screen was broken. It looked more like a Rorschach test. When I asked about the broken machine, she responded with a smirk and told me to read the line again. The machine was working just fine, but my eyes weren't. I needed glasses, and I had no idea. I'm not sure how long my eyesight had been suffering, but I had obviously never noticed because I had gotten used to it. Later, when I put on new glasses, I understood what I had been missing. This is often how we operate in the spiritual realm. We think we're seeing life for what it is, but when we encounter Jesus and see the world through him, we see the truth and we see it clearly.
So we're going to be talking about God's opening eyes through a lot of symbolism this morning, based on Jesus healing the blind man who had been blind from birth. You know, the thing I want to read this morning, and it makes a lot of sense, is the life connection from the scripture. And it says, perhaps you've heard of the expression, the hardest part about being deceived is that you don't even know you're being deceived. I think a lot of us find out ourselves in that some situation sometimes. Something similar could be said about our sight, our ability to see the truth. We can convince ourselves that we see life as it really is when in reality we're blind. It's only when we encounter Christ that our perspective can change and we gain a proper understanding of truth and life. So we're going to understand this morning that we're talking about, and you've probably heard this before, a lot of people can see but they have no vision. There's a lot of difference between seeing something and having a vision of something. God gives us that vision that he's talking about here. We all see things, but we see it from our own perspective. We need to start and learn how to see things from God's perspective. That's vision. Seeing things in our own perspective, just seeing it. We don't really have reality. It's seeing it from our own eyes. So we're going to learn this morning that how God and how Jesus is using a symbolic message through healing the blind man, that how he's doing this in a way that allows the blind man not only to see, but to have vision. And that's what he's trying to do this morning in this lesson. And I'm going to ask Megan if she will begin by reading verses 1 through 7 from John 9.
As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spit on the ground and made some mud with the saliva and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." So the man went and washed, and he came home seeing.
So, as I said earlier, Jesus is at the temple. The storyline here is he's being kind of chased now. He's on kind of like, as they described it here, he's kind of like on stealth mode. He's went in and told the people in the temple, the Pharisees, some things of like he is the Son of the Father, and they're just not accepting it. So it's not like Jesus Christ is walking along there real slow. He's in kind of a rapid pace because he knows, matter of fact, the Pharisees has already attempted to stone Jesus after he made that statement. So where he's at now, he's on the trail from the temple, and he passes by the blind man. And as you can see here, the disciples asked, Rabbi, who sinned? Because was it his parents to make him born blind? Because back in these days, they felt like a person that was disabled, blind, leper, whatever it was, that somebody in the family had sinned against God and the law of Moses, so somebody got punished. So that's the first question the disciples asked at that point is, who sinned? Did he sin? Did his parents sin? Because there's got to be something going on here in his family life, and something had to be done to cause this guy to be blind. And as you see Jesus' response, it says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. So this was all worked out by God with Jesus, because he wanted this man to be there in that very place when he left the temple, so that he could set a point by using this blind man to show them that he is the true Messiah. He's not there as somebody claiming to be a prophet. He's going to prove to the people at this time that he is the Messiah. He's going to heal this blind man and make people see who he really is. Going to the next verse, you see that he's kind of in an urgency. Jesus is in an urgent time here, as I said earlier, as it says, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent him, because night is coming. No one can work after that. What he's talking about there, he knows night is coming, and night is, he's fixing to be hung on the cross. He knows that. He knows his time is coming near. And he's explaining to his disciples, we got to work, and we got to work hard. We've got to do things to show who I am and what I'm for and what God has sent me to do, because night is coming. I'm going to hang on a cross, and I know it. And we've only got a matter of time to get this done. And as he explains himself, he says, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So he's trying to explain to him. There's a lot of symbolism here by bringing light back to the blind man, and him explaining to the disciples that he is the light of the world. He is the light of the world because he's going to take this blind man's darkness and turn it to light. And he's going to help him see, as I said earlier, we're going to find out, he don't only physically begin to see, he begins to have a vision. And we talk about that a lot. Mike understands about that in sales. We all see things we want, but do we have vision to get there? That's the problem. And a lot of times us as Christians, we see ourselves as Christians, but do we have the vision God wants us to have to get where we're supposed to go? And that's what he's trying to set up this morning, is giving this man vision. He's been blind his entire life. He's never seen the light of day, and he's fixing to see the light of day. This is a pretty good way they put it here in the Courtly. It says, Jesus offered the disciples an altogether different interpretation. They saw the blind as an opportunity to search for somebody to blame. Don't we do that a lot? You always got to find somebody to blame with somebody's circumstances. There's always time to blame somebody. By contrast, Jesus saw it as an opportunity to provide a gracious display of God's miraculous works so everyone could see them for themselves and glorify him for compassion to help and his power to heal. Jesus is going to use it as God wanted him to use it. He's not using it to try to blame somebody. He's using it as an opportunity to show the people that he's there, not only to heal, but to forgive and to display the miraculous works that he can do. Now, we go to verse 6, and it says, after saying this, he spit on the ground and, spit, made mud with his saliva, and put it on a man's eyes. First thing you say, well, couldn't Jesus just have snapped his fingers and said he can see again? Yep, he sure could have. That makes you ask the question, why did he do all this? There's symbolic measures here to what Jesus is trying to do. We all know in Genesis that the man was made from the dust of the earth. This is a symbolic message that he took dirt again from the ground and made it mud and rubbed it on the man's eyes. This is just like he created man from the soil. He is going to bring soul up and give this man his vision. You know, the unique thing about this is Jesus is part of this, but the most unique thing I found about it is the man's blind. He's rubbed mud on his eyes, and what does Jesus tell him to do? Go wash in the pool of Siloam. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. Well, my first thought was, he said, go wash your eyes in the pool of Siloam. Okay, the man's blind. You go wash your eyes. Well, he's blind. So one of two things either is happening here, is he's got somebody there leading him, or he has got in most times you see people around that's been blind their whole life. They have a perception of places they've been. They might have a stick, but they're pretty good at walking. So that's the only perception. But the biggest thing here I learned from that guy is he's just met Jesus, and he already has faith in him enough to say, I'm going to walk. And from research I can gather, it's about 70 yards from where Jesus was at the time, near the northwest part of the temple, down to this pool that he tells him to go to and wash. They say the pool of Siloam is about, from what I can understand, it had been destroyed multiple times during battles and everything, but the last one they're talking about here during Jesus' time, the pool was about 240 feet wide, and it was about 19 feet deep, so they had steps that you could walk down into it. Did the blind man fall into the water? I don't know, and that really isn't important, other than he walked 70 yards completely blind. And this pool of Siloam is important because that's where people went and they thought it had spiritual water. They thought that they went down and drank the water and sprinkled it on themselves. I think that's symbolic, and to show Jesus the fact that you're going to a pool and relying on that spiritual water, which is fine, and they were trusting in God, but Jesus wanted to show them that he had a different spiritual water to provide other than that pool of water that they were going down. I'm sure there was a lot of people there. There was a lot of disabled people, a lot of people there that was sitting around praying and hoping over that water. If they bathed in it, they were going to be healed. That's why Jesus sends them down there, so that they have a vision as to, hey, this guy just came down here. He's been blind his whole life. It would be just like us if we knew somebody blind and they walked in this morning and sat down and they could see. They're starting to question now. So this man has faith already. He ain't known Jesus, but hey, 30 seconds, maybe 5 minutes at the most. And he's already trusting in him. Because if he didn't, what do you think he would have done? Man, he's spitting down in the dirt, making mud and wiping it on my eyes. What are you doing? But he didn't do that. He took the 70-yard trek down to the pool of water, and he went down, washed his eyes, and he came home seeing. Now, we're going to bounce forward, obviously, with verses 32 and 33, but I'm going to ask John. I think John's got it pulled up, because our Courtleys jump from 7 to 32 and 33. If I jump to 32 and 33, you're not really going to understand what in the world's going on. So I'm going to ask John if he would read verses 8 through 33 so we can get a better understanding of it.
The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some said, "It is he." Others said, "No, but he is like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." So they said to him, "Then how were your eyes open?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, anointed my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight, and he said, "He put mud on my eyes, I washed, and now I can see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, How can a man who is a sinner do such signs?" And there was a division among them. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him, since he has opened your eyes?" He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called to the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But how he now sees we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "Whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" And they reviled him, saying, You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Why, this is an amazing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him." Do you want me to read
read 32 through.
And then 32, "Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing."
So, what John just read was, what did y'all hear? Nobody wanted to hear the fact of Jesus healing the blind man. They missed the whole point. As it says here, the Pharisees missed it. This man blind from birth can now see, but these men were only concerned about one thing, and one thing alone. He had healed the man on the seventh day. They missed the whole point. It says here the religious experts were supposed to be able to see with spiritual eyes, but were utterly blind. They couldn't even see past their own facts of life and being able to have that vision. It's amazing to me that guy had only known God or Jesus for only about 5 minutes. And as John just read, and his answers to the experts sounded to me like the blind man who'd been healed was the expert. What I gathered out of the conversation, because he sounded more like an expert of what just happened than even the Pharisees did. It says, the question here this morning is, will we even in our own lives see God at work? We are blessed to notice God on the move. We don't need to stand around and argue about it like the Pharisees did. We just need to jump in and join in. That's the lesson from this whole conversation that you can understand. We miss the vision sometimes that God's trying to put in our life, and by doing things. See, this guy had been blind for his whole life, but Jesus was using it. He used it as a point to try to help. I don't know how many other people began to believe in Jesus that day, but I'm sure it was multitudes of people. Because this blind man walks up there and Jesus Christ has rubbed his eyes with mud. He now sees. That story that John just read, the Pharisees couldn't see past the end of their nose, and sometimes we in our own lives can't either. You know, things happen in life, good or bad, and we try to get perplexed as to why things happen the way they do. Or one thing that I noticed about this man too, the blind man, he really interests me, because it doesn't say anywhere that he complained about being blind. It doesn't ever say anything about his complaint about life in general. The thing I like about him here is what he was willing to go up against the Pharisees when probably nobody else wouldn't, because the thing about during that day, you ask why his parents wouldn't speak for him, is because they were scared. That's why they said, he's of age, we're not speaking for him, because they were afraid. They were afraid of the Pharisees and what they would do to them, because they knew what would happen. Obviously, we're going to find out in just a minute that they kicked the blind man out of the temple and the synagogue. And this was more than just getting kicked out of the synagogue. This is why I say this man had faith beyond anything. And obviously, it would be, in my book, if a man had taken me and I'd been blind my whole life and allowed me to see, I would have tremendous faith too. Right, Blake? It'd be, yeah, I'd probably jump on board with him too. So, but the thing about this faith was, it was just more than about being blind. You got to understand that because he backed up what Jesus had done for him to the Pharisees by being expelled from the synagogue, and as it says here, meant being discredited in the community. Family relationships as well as his business opportunities would be ruined. Meaning, his family relationships, his mother and father might disown him because of this very thing. They were following Moses' law, and the Pharisees says that's what we're following. This is not Jesus Christ. You are discredited. You will be, who knows what happened to the blind man after that. So it was more than him just being healed. It was the fact that he gained a vision Jesus Christ had given him at the time, and he was willing to take the judgment that it was coming. And he knew what it was going to be. He would probably be expelled from the own community that he had lived in his whole life. So that's the thing that you can gather from this morning. But the thing that's funny about it is, nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind, as it says in 32. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And what was the Pharisees' response? They had no response. What was their response? Kick him out of the synagogue. They had no response, because there's nobody ever been healed from blindness. There's a few others in the Bible, but from birth to now, this is the first one. And they don't have an answer. They don't have an answer. The only answer they had was kick him out of the synagogue, because we don't have an answer. We can't dispute what he's saying. That's the thing that's relatable this morning. You know, it's a great point to understand. That guy, he not only got healed, but as we're going to see in the next verses that I'm going to get Lori to read, he not only is able to see, he's going to have a vision and a belief. And I'll get Lori to read verses 35 through 38.
Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him.
You know, since Jesus has had so many followers at this time, and obviously these people at this pool have seen this guy walk up to the pool, wipe the mud off his eyes, and you can imagine how many followers at the time are looking Jesus, because they're like, hey, he just healed a blind man, he can heal me. And so you can imagine the rush that's happening. And you would say, well, Jesus is probably going to try to, he's heard about the incident, and it's unfortunate, but I've proved to them that I am the Messiah. But he didn't do that. On the contrary, he chose, in this verses here, he chose to go find the blind man. He chose to go try to find the man that he had healed, because he wanted to talk to him, because he had physically allowed him to see, but he wanted him to not only have the first miracle, but he also wanted to have the second miracle. And you know what the second miracle is? He wanted him to open his spiritual eyes beyond just open his physical. And that's what he was trying to do. He wanted to make sure, and it shows God's love for each and every one of us. He went and tried to find this one very man, and he wanted to make sure he could not only see physically, but he seen spiritually. And that's why he asked him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And obviously, the guy already has respect for him, because he calls him sir. "Who is he, sir? And tell me so that I may believe." And obviously you see Jesus says, "You have now seen in him." Fact, he is the one speaking with you. And then it says, the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. The two very main things that we have to do in life, the man said he would do. He first believed, and he secondly worshiped him. And this guy's life, can you imagine, in a matter of hours, his life has gone full circle. From being a beggar, blind man on the street, to being able to see, not only physically, but spiritually. And giving him a vision that no one else, probably during that day and time, the greatest vision that you possibly could have, because he was healed by the Messiah. So he's got the greatest vision of all in my book. It's like, it'd be hard not to have faith in Jesus Christ when he done something for you like that. And he stood behind Jesus Christ, as he said earlier, willing to take being expelled from his own area, being able to be banished from his family. He didn't back off of what he felt about Jesus Christ and what he had done for him. So we can take message from this guy this morning. First off, he had faith in Jesus Christ from the word go, because he really wouldn't have had any faith in him and walked down to the pool to wipe the mud off his eyes. Because, as you can imagine, he don't know Jesus Christ, and he reaches down and rubs saliva mud on his eyes. He had to have some type of faith at that very point, and we can gather an understanding from that this morning. But talking about vision, it says here, we can convince ourselves that we see life as it really is, when in reality we're blind. You know, do we have that blindness? There's a lot of people out there today, whether they're in church or not, some in church probably, we sometimes can convince ourselves what we see is reality, and really is not, unfortunately. We want to make our life, or whatever situation is, what we want to make it. And that's what God and what Jesus Christ did for that blind man. He not only got him to see physically, he got him to see reality through God's eyes. That's what we have to do as Christians. We've got to look at our situation and the things in our life and look at it from God's perspective, not our own. And that's why the blind man that was healed went the rest of his life, I'm sure, with a different perspective on things in life, obviously, than he ever had. Not just because he could physically see, but because he could spiritually see. It says here, it's only when we can encounter Christ that our perspective can change. We gain a proper understanding of truth and life. What will you do as a result of this study? You know, life's tough enough as it is. And then when we look at it from the wrong perspective, we make it even tougher. So we can gain perspective from this lesson and how the blind man seen things differently from that point of view. It says here we got 3 things that we can do. It says we can see. Obviously, we can determine through reading the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and take note of the insights you discover about what Jesus is and how he desires us to work. They talk about many miracles and how things symbolically can teach us about life. We must pray. You know, life change happens. Jesus is at work in us and around us all the time. We need to ask God to give us eyes to see that the people around here are in need. We need to use them spiritual eyes instead of our own physical eyes sometimes to see things from how God wants us to see them, and not look at it from our perspective but God's perspective. And then finally, we need to help. Jesus met a physical need and then used it as a springboard to discuss the spiritual need. You know, that's how we can help people. As Jesus, that's a good example. A lot of times we help people physically before we can help them spiritually. And that's what Jesus did there. He was able to help him physically to get him to understand that this is how God's love truly works. And then you're allowed maybe to take it a step further with the person that you've helped and give him it gives you an opportunity to talk to him. And at that point, after you've helped them physically, then you can definitely probably help them spiritually as well if they're lost in their life. And finally, it says this morning, the blind man in this story wasn't the one suffering from the greatest blindness. It was the Pharisees. They had seen Jesus physically, but just could not believe. The blind man saw Jesus with spiritual eyes and believed. So we can see the contrast between what the Pharisees seen and what the blind man seen when his eyes were open. We can take a pretty good lesson from that this morning as we look around at our situations, at people around us, at work, school, wherever it may be, and try to gain a better understanding. And when we run into situations, we need to use God's spiritual viewpoint instead of our own. Does anybody have anything to add this morning? Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this lesson this morning. We thank you for the miracles that you did, Lord, when you sent your Son while he was on earth to give us a better understanding of not only the miraculous power that he had while he was here, but the symbolic measures that you used to help us understand not only about our own life, but how to treat people and how to get a better understanding of our Christian faith. Just pray now, Lord, that you'll be with Pastor E.C. this morning as he brings our morning message. Help us to listen to him and gain a perspective from his word, Lord. Just pray now, Lord, that you'll be with the many sick this morning, the many lost. You know each and every need there. And just pray, Lord, that you'll please forgive us of our many shortcomings.